I want, first of all, to say good morning to you all and thank the Department of Arts, Heritage and Gaeltacht for inviting me to speak to you this morning. And it's really nice to be back, actually, having been involved a little bit in the advisory panel work. Okay. I just thought I ought to begin with a few words about the person who's talking to you, because I'm not really very well qualified to make this presentation. The first reason is that this is the only site on the tentative list which I have visited, apart from visits to Dublin. The second reason is that I'm not an expert on cultural matters at all, but my involvement in the convention, such as it is, has been on the natural side. The third reason is I don't really know Ireland, as you might have guessed already, all that well. The fourth reason is that I'm English. So this, having established my total unsuitability for making this presentation, let's proceed, but I think you should understand that. So this is what I'm going to talk about, and I should say that maybe this presentation should have come earlier in the order, but because I'm bound to repeat some of the things that have been said already. However, those of you who are new to World Heritage, and I expect there are quite a few in the audience who will have already got the impression that it's a big and complex issue. So a certain amount of repetition may not be a total waste of time. I'm going to go back to the roots of the World Heritage Convention a bit, ask a little bit more about what's involved in getting a site on the list and managing it, and then looking with the benefit of a few very quick case studies at benefits and threats issues. It's not usual to put a conclusion at the start, but I think I will, because I think it's really important that these three messages are ones you take away with you, and I'll come back to them at the end, that making a successful nomination, actually by now you must have already gathered that, is tough. The standards are very high, and success is not guaranteed. And if a site is inscribed, then it comes with important obligations, hence the title of my talk. Inscription, in fact, is only the start of the process. Some pretty pictures. You don't need me to tell you where that is. This is the Drakensberg in South Africa, Angkor Wat, which is actually the country where the World Heritage Committee met most recently in Cambodia. The far east of Russia, the Kamchatka Peninsula, an astonishing landscape of volcanoes. Machu Picchu in Peru in South America. The Temple of Thebes in Egypt. Victoria Falls on the Zimbabwe-Zambia border. And Mount Etna doing its thing. And the Gothic and 19th century wonders of Notre Dame. The point about all these places is that we think of them in our collective memory, really, as places which we have a kind of interest in, even if we've never been there. And I think we could say they are for everyone and forever, we hope. And that's the idea that's captured in the World Heritage Convention. Sites that belong to all the peoples of the world, irrespective of the territory on which they are located. And when I come right back at the end talking about some of the management issues, I think that message needs to be reinforced. So the site on the World Heritage List has a kind of international responsibility. And what gives these sites a common identity is that they have, and you've heard this phrase already, outstanding universal value. Each word is very important. The convention emerged out of really two parallel movements going on in the 50s and 60s. One is about nature conservation, protection of the natural environment. The other is about protecting the global heritage. You've heard about the flooding of Abu Simbel already, and so forth. And these ideas come together, certainly the environmental ideas come together in the Stockholm Conference of 1972. And in the same year, a little later, UNESCO adopts the World Heritage Convention. There's the full title, but it's always known as the World Heritage Convention. And since adoption of the convention, which is now 41 years ago, 190 states parties, these are slightly more updated figures that we're offering, so it's an ever-changing picture, have signed the convention, and they have inscribed 981 sites. And these sites are cultural sites, sites of outstanding universal value from their cultural point of view. I won't tell you where that is, I'm sure you know. Great natural sites, like the plains of Serengeti. And sites, there are a few sites which are mixed, which are important both for their natural qualities and their cultural ones. And this is the island of St Kilda off the west coast of Scotland, United Kingdom's only mixed site, a dramatic natural site with astonishing populations of seabirds, but also testament to human ability to live in the most extreme conditions. So this is a mixed site. And as you've already heard, there's a predominance of cultural properties on the World Heritage List. Nearly 1,000 in total, and approximately 3/4 of those are cultural sites. The distribution geographically is also a bit of a surprise, because nearly half of these are in a region which is rather curiously called by the United Nations Europe and North America. The United Nations has regions that are inherited from 1945, and they've never got round to changing them. But the majority of sites in that grey area, that purple area, are in fact in continental Europe or the islands around it, like Ireland and the United Kingdom. So there is a dominance of sites from our region, and that's an issue. The achievements of the convention, I think, are really impressive and they've grown over the years. Nearly every country belongs to it. That in itself is a major achievement. In the environmental movement, it is by far the most signed up to convention, much more than the Convention on Biological Diversity, which, for example, the United States hasn't signed. And most members have put sites on the list. And the convention has a high profile, not only internationally, but as this meeting is obvious evidence of, nationally too. It's raised the status of natural and cultural heritage, and it's brought them together within one framework, which is really unusual and I think one of the strengths of the convention. It has helped to build capacity in heritage management, particularly in developing countries, and it's mobilized a lot of international assistance for developing countries. I think you can save billions of dollars, because if you look at the way in which the bilateral donors, World Bank, EU, have focused their support upon World Heritage sites, you can see how effective it's been in that way. And it's saved, therefore, some sites from being lost, and it's restored others. But there are some difficult questions. How good is the coverage? Is it balanced? We've already seen a geographical imbalance, and I think questions have been asked earlier about some of the other balances within the cultural side, for example. What is enough? Outstanding universal value? Not everything can be of outstanding universal value, or it becomes meaningless. So at what point is it enough? Is there some danger that we are inscribing sites that are, a bit marginal? Is the brand being devalued? How well do sites actually get protected once they've been put on the list? Do countries fulfill their responsibilities? Do people understand those responsibilities indeed? And does the focus on nomination sometimes overshadow the needs of management of the existing sites that are already on the list? So these are the kind of painful questions that the World Heritage Committee and the World Heritage community generally has to wrestle with. So what's involved in getting a site on the World Heritage List? Now, this is covering a lot of the territory that you've already heard, so I'll be very quick about that. These are the main parties in the nomination process. The state party nominates, even though it will be, as you've heard, local communities, people like yourselves, who will be putting together the nomination. It will be the state party which is the face of your efforts within the World Heritage Committee. They send the documents, they make their nomination through the World Heritage Centre in Paris, the secretariat to the convention, which seeks the advice of these two advisory bodies, ICOMOS for culture, IUCN for natural qualities. And the decisions are taken by the World Heritage Committee, 21-member countries drawn from 190 who have the authority to, as you know already, inscribe or defer, refer or reject a proposal. No site can go forward except in the most exceptional circumstances without first of all appearing on the tentative list. And you will be hearing later from Christopher about how to look more critically at the tentative list once it's been prepared and before you get to the nomination file. This document has now appeared twice in slides, so this is the third time, so it must be an important document. This is the advice from the Unesco World Heritage Centre about how to put together nominations. And, this is a thing I shall say several times. There's an awful lot of online guidance available to you from the centre and from the two expert bodies. And it's really good to get your mind around that. The nomination file, you've also heard about. Nomination dossier, the same thing. Has to identify and describe the site and justify it with a statement of outstanding universal value, a synthesis of the things that make the area really important. 10 criteria, we'll look at those in a moment, and an important thing, a comparative analysis that looks at your site vis-à-vis other sites in your country, certainly, within Europe, and indeed to a degree globally. Certainly on the natural side, we have a global framework for evaluating many sites. And the site, if it's a cultural site, must be authentic, and all sites must have integrity, which means they should be whole and as far as possible, devoid of damaging impacts. The state of conservation should be described, any threats to the site should be described, and the measures taken to protect and manage the site and proposed for the site in future also. And then indicators of monitoring performance. Yes, just as a footnote here, and I saw the figure earlier, 500,000 euros. The UK looked at some of the larger, more complex nominations and estimated that it was costing them about £400,000, which today's exchange rate is somewhere around about 500,000 euros. So it's not cheap putting together the nomination file. It's the product of a long process. Core concept, as you've heard, is that of outstanding universal value, OUV. You'll hear that again and again in this process. Has your site got OUV? And here's a rather circular definition of OUV from within the operational guidelines, and that's another document you have to get your mind around. So these are the 10 key tests, and a site will not be inscribed unless it has achieved at least one of those criteria, and in some cases two, because it's unusual to nominate and inscribe a site under 6 or 7 without an additional criteria 2. The red criteria are, of course, the cultural ones. The green ones are the natural ones. And there is masses of advice about how to interpret that, how to understand that. The other key concept you've already heard again, and I repeat it, is the importance of integrity, and in the case of cultural sites, authenticity, and having an adequate system in place to protect and manage the site. Having done the nomination file and presented the dossier, then it's, as you've heard, reviewed by ICOMOS or IUCN, and they ask the same questions, they go through the same process, and they make their recommendation to the World Heritage Committee, which takes the decision. That process, from submitting the nomination file to the decision of the committee, takes approximately 18 months. The file has to be in by the February of the previous year, decisions taken in the northern summer of the following year. Just quickly, a few words about management. Of course, the job really begins after that, because when you become a World Heritage Site, then there are standards that you have to meet. And the most important one is to maintain and indeed, to a degree, enhance the outstanding universal value of the site. Quite often, inscription comes with recommendations. The state party is recommended not to proceed with that road or that hydro scheme or whatever, and the state party would be very foolish not to listen to that advice from the World Heritage Committee. The committee monitors the state of conservation on the site. The state party is accountable for management, therefore, with international oversight. And the centre and advisory bodies assist in that process. And again, there's an awful lot of advice online. So those comments are particularly relevant to the site I went to yesterday, Brunner-Boyne, which was a fantastic discovery for me. I really was very thrilled, standing in the dark and seeing the light penetrating into the tunnel inside the tomb. But the protection of this site is a very high responsibility upon the local community, the local authorities, and the Irish government, likewise, Skellig Michael. I move now to talking about the benefits of World Heritage status. What are they? Well, this is what UNESCO is saying. They're kind of pretty bullish about it. You get better protection of the site, prestige, more people might come and visit it, so forth and so on. However, in the UK, we did two analyses, one of 6 sites and one of the Lake District, which looked at that a bit more critically. And the conclusion that's drawn from those studies is the benefits don't come automatically from calling your site a World Heritage Site. They arise by the use that is made of that nomination, that successful inscription. Let's have a look at a few examples. Blaenavon in South Wales is the easternmost of the mining valleys. It's a really important place because of the industrial archaeology which is contained there. There's some very important innovations made, particularly in the metallurgical industrial processes. But with the closure of the mines and the decline of other industry, Blaenavon became a very depressed and very sad place. The local community and others thought that the heritage was indeed of unique importance, and they persuaded the World Heritage Committee in the year 2000 to nominate the site, inscribe the site, and it is now, and has been a World Heritage Site for 13 years. And a great effort has been made within the area to tackle some of the problems as well as to display and protect the heritage itself, and to use the heritage indeed to revive the sense of pride and the economy of the local community. Something like £30 million has been put into Blaenavon from the Welsh government and from European funds and other sources to encourage regeneration around the heritage theme. There's been a rise in property prices. Well, it may not be to everyone's advantage, but it certainly is an indication of wealth and growing interest in the area. Visitor numbers are up, new jobs created in construction and tourism and so forth, new businesses. Much dereliction has been removed. But to my mind, the most significant thing that's happened in Blaenavon as a result of World Heritage inscription is the growth of community pride. A community which was rather ashamed of its environment, which didn't like Blaenavon, has now become proud of Blaenavon. We are a World Heritage Site. We are really important in the history of the world. Another site also from the UK is the Dorset and East Devon coast. This is England's only natural site. It's a remarkable display of geological features. You have nearly the entire Mesozoic period of evolution represented through rocks that are oldest in the west and newest in the east, and plus some extraordinary coastal features. And it's also been very important in understanding geology. It is also extremely beautiful. And one of the perhaps most significant things about this area is it enables the public to see and understand geology, to understand time depth, if you like. This little girl is listening to the woman who's just opened up the fossil, and she is addressed there as Mary Anning, who was an early Victorian geologist, a remarkable woman, remarkable for a woman to be a geologist in those days, and did much pioneer work in the area, and lived at Lyme Regis. So the local people in this area have, I think, made a tremendous amount of the Jurassic Coast, as they call it. New tourist businesses have been developed. There's a local authority bus service runs along the coast. There are people who now provide sea cruises, so you can see the cliffs from the sea, which of course is the only way you can see them all the way. A lot of new tourist activities taking place, a major expansion in the use of the area for education, sciences, and the overwhelming majority of people, residents and businesses, say it's had a positive effect. And if you say the Jurassic Coast now, most people know what you're talking about. So it's achieved national recognition and has been very successful. For something completely different, I'd like to take you to Greenland, the west coast of Greenland. This was I have to say, one of the most beautiful places I ever went to, completely breathtaking. This great glacier, the Kangia Glacier, drains the central part of the Greenland ice cap, and it passes, 120 kilometers. Here is the ice fjord, and at the end, the ice is forced over a sill of rock and breaks up into huge icebergs which float out into the Atlantic, and one of these indeed sank the Titanic in 1911. So this is a place of remarkable geological and glaciological significance. It's the biggest glacier in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, there's been quite a lot of problems here, this site, and because the environment is so sensitive, rising numbers of visitors have actually brought lots of difficulties of erosion, crowding, waste disposal. Things don't decay rapidly in a cold climate. The vegetation is extremely vulnerable to being trod on and so forth. So working with Unesco, the local group have prepared a management plan which has dealt with nearly all the practical issues that they can, and there has been a significant improvement in the management of the site, and that's come about directly through the processes initiated through the convention. But climate change is a far bigger issue for this area, and indeed for others too, and it indicates perhaps the limits of World Heritage. And that leads perhaps naturally talking just a little bit about the last part of this talk to about the threats. The threats to World Heritage sites, if you like, are many. This is just the list of the most obvious. If they've got C after their name, it means that cultural sites are particularly vulnerable, and natural sites likewise for N. But many of these affect many sites, and even, thankfully, if armed conflict is no longer an issue in Ireland, I suspect some of these other issues could affect, or may already affect, World Heritage sites. So it is a real issue, and an issue indeed that very few World Heritage sites are lucky enough to not to have a problem with. There is a system for trying to deal with threats within the framework of the World Heritage Convention. Threats are identified through a process called periodic reporting, which is a sort of cyclical attempt to try and identify threats, and also reactive monitoring, which I like to think of as really as sort of whistleblowing as some particular problem has arisen at rather short notice. Advice is sought from the advisory bodies on the threats and problems, and the World Heritage Committee then reviews the options and what could be done. Now, in extremis, it could say this is so bad that the outstanding universal value is lost and the site should be removed from the World Heritage list. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. It could decide to put the site on the World Heritage in danger list, which is a way of marking up the threat to the site and the need for action to deal with it. Or it could confine itself to giving advice back to the state party about what needs to be done. So here's the worst case scenario. The Arabian Oryx sanctuary in Oman. The Arabian Oryx was basically extinct in the wild, was then reintroduced, mainly through the efforts of the San Diego Zoo in America, into this area and indeed other areas in the Middle East in the 1980s. And the site was inscribed with great pride by the Omanis at that point with 450 pairs of oryx. But almost immediately after that, things began to go downhill. The number of oryx declined. There was a lot of poaching. No protection was being given to the oryx and indeed other species in the area. The local nature reserve was reduced drastically. Oil exploration was allowed. There was a repeated dialogue between the World Heritage Committee and the government of Oman, and in the end the committee said, I'm sorry, this just doesn't work. We don't think you're fulfilling your obligations. The site really has lost the outstanding universal value for which it was inscribed, and it comes off the list. It's only happened on one other occasion in Dresden, and these are sad stories, and they're not really successes of the convention, although they do indicate the convention has teeth. The second example, and I put this in just because this is another area which I had the privilege to visit several times, the rice terraces of the Philippines, which are the most extraordinary, dramatic landscapes. Some of the slopes are 45 degrees. This is an environment that is subject to periodic typhoons, earthquakes and landslips. So there's a lot of work to maintain these systems, and a lot of complex cultural structures underpin the physical structures as well. This is exactly the kind of environment which is at risk from social changes as the community structures break down, some of the traditions are lost. And that's reflected in the loss of the terraces. So, for example, young men no longer want to spend several months of the year in quite cold climate planting or harvesting rice. They would prefer to be taxi drivers in Manila. And there's a decline of young people working the terraces, and the local community is less and less effective at doing that. So at the request of the Philippines government itself, the site was put on the World Heritage in Danger list in 2001. And then a lot of international and national effort was marshalled. Not all the problems have been dealt with, but a good many of them have. And this year, quite a triumph, I think, the site was removed from the in danger list. My very last example brings us back into Ireland. And there are, I think, some people here from Northern Ireland, although I'm not sure that they have been directly involved in this case. I say that with caution because what I'm about to say may not be too welcome. This site was inscribed in 1986. By about 2002, the World Heritage Committee was getting concerned about piecemeal tourism development in the area. And a mission went, UNESCO IUCN mission went to look at what was happening, and they recommended really two things: unified management of the site and a buffer zone around the site. Now, there was then a real effort to deal with the first of these. The Northern Ireland government, the local authority, private developers, and the National Trust struggled to find a solution, and in the end, the National Trust gained control of the key parts of the site. And this year, a new centre, visitor centre, has been opened, which is really, I think, a quite striking and very successful one. It's been winning all sorts of design awards. And they really have got the site, the central part of the Giant's Causeway site, access to it and so forth, under some sort of control, and there's a lot more coming that will improve this. However, the story doesn't end there. Just to the south and west of the site is an area called Runkerry, which is sand dunes and agricultural land. And a proposal for a major golf resort has come forward there. Now, the buffer zone was never made, despite the recommendation from the UNESCO IUCN mission, but this most certainly would have been within the buffer zone had it been created. Northern Ireland ministers gave approval for the site in March 2012. The National Trust, by now responsible really for the site itself, sought judicial review. They argued that the minister had failed to take account of the World Heritage Convention and its implications in making the decision. They failed in that bid, although the judgments were not wholly unhelpful in some of the comments. Also, as a result of the National Trust's intervention, IUCN sent a mission to the site earlier this year. Again, I summarised from a very long report. The impacts on the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage site appear sufficiently significant that the development should not be permitted, because it's visible from the site. It's very, very impacting on the quality of the site. This was not welcome news for the Northern Ireland government, I have to say. But the World Heritage Committee, meeting in Cambodia, urged the UK to halt the proposed golf resort development project until its potential impact on the OUV of the property had been thoroughly assessed. Now, the point, this goes right back to the point I made at the start of this talk, that a World Heritage site, in some senses, has become international property. Of course, it's still the property of the country concerned, but the international community has a legitimate interest. And that, in a sense, is the price that's paid by getting a site on the World Heritage list. So it's quite a tough message, but it is important to understand that. Okay, well, finally, what lessons do we draw from this for the sites on the Irish tentative list? Places like this, and this one. I repeat now, first of all, exactly what I said at the start of the talk, because I don't think it can be said too often. World Heritage getting World Heritage status is not easy. It needs time, effort, money, and most importantly, which is why you are so important in being in this room, local support. It won't happen without that. Success is not guaranteed. Not every site on the tentative list will go forward to nomination, and not every nomination will succeed. Sometimes they fail. And we had an experience of that in the United Kingdom with the Darwin's site in Kent recently. And then, as I hope you've now got this message, inscription comes with big obligations. It's the start, not the finish. I did not want to end on such a kind of, downbeat. So, it's actually fantastic to get World Heritage status an honour, and to see the site that I saw yesterday, absolutely to know that is a World Heritage site. It's been very well managed. It's a great thing to have achieved. And it can be used to do all these things that UNESCO and others have talked about. It can be used as a means to engage more with the local community, and indeed it should be. And you become part of a global family, which I think is a very important thing, and that helps to raise the vision of everybody involved in this process. So I just think good luck to you.